Welcome back, everyone. We're still here with Matt and Isabel, and I think that we've got a good transition now to admissions. Like as Isabel talks about things like risk takers, Matt, as you talk about things like interest in research, obviously you're going to be looking for students that embrace that kind of thing. So Isabel, maybe we'll start with you and you can kind of talk about what you are. And let me just back up and say, obviously you expect top grades in incredibly rigorous curriculum. And like, that's a given, right? But let's go kind of beyond that to those personal qualities, because that's really the hardest part, I think, for families to understand. How does someone stand out in your pool when, all A's and 5 APs in the junior year is not going to stand out? It's not going to stand out. It's going to be normal.
So I'm going to go rogue a little. Hopefully,
okay. You can go rogue. You can go rogue.
But I think I just want to back up a second and say and just remind folks that these college admissions decisions are not an arbiter of if you're going to be successful in life,
yes,
if you're a good person, if you are smart, or they've turned into these kind of tokens of symbolism. And as students and families are making choices around how to spend time in high school, what classes to pursue, what activities to pursue, I totally recognize the importance of a college degree. I believe in it. I believe that college can be a transformative moment in so many different ways in a young person's life, but really challenging folks to not do something purely for the impact that it will have on the college admissions process.
Yes.
Because it just, you're losing out on so much. And the way that activities or academic choices have an impact on the admissions process is how it's actually impacted the student, how it's changed them, how it's opened up kind of new doorways for things that they're curious about or passionate about. And the reality is far more students stand out in our pool than we ultimately admit. And so it's a challenging question to answer because, first of all, you say one thing and people kind of feel like that is better than something else, but it may not be the better choice for that particular student. And so I think, it's so generic but doing things that students enjoy, that they're passionate about, not being afraid to stop doing something and try something new, worrying about like, well, I haven't done it for 4 years, I'm not showing commitment. No, that's okay. That's showing the confidence and the kind of knowledge in yourself to say, this isn't quite what I thought it would be or wanted it to be. And so I'm going to try something else. There really isn't, a right or wrong pathway into these institutions. And you mentioned like, oh, obviously top grades, but some kids have a bobble in their grades for really valid reasons. And so, we're not making, a choice about, someone who has all A's or had an A- or a B+. Like, right. I mean, that shows this willingness to maybe try something. And just that idea of not just working for the grade, for the external validation of it, but for the experience, for the learning, for how it kind of opens your mind up to future possibilities. I recognize that is not super helpful, tangible advice, but if I had a better answer for that, I would probably be a billionaire by now. That's not how our processes work, as much as people want them to. So I don't know, Matt, maybe you have a better answer for that, but I think a lot about this and how it affects the mental health of students, and really trying to find balance and wellness in this whole process as much as humanly possible.
And I echo everything you said, Isabel, and I think those are all incredibly important points. I guess I'll sort of think about it in a different way. So and think more towards the application itself and why we ask for the things we do, because I think both of us here, both Dartmouth and Princeton, have supplements and additional information that we ask of applicants. So for students who are going through the process or about to, you will most likely fill out the common application, which is the document that goes to every single school for the most part that you will be applying to. Many institutions, like the two of ours, require additional info. And that is where we have control over the questions we ask and the information that we get to learn about you. And I would argue that this is the most critical piece of the process. Most places, they are not academic questions. Again, we care about your academic success and your potential for success in our classrooms and on our campus, but we are looking to get to know you as people, and the perspective that you're going to bring to our, not only our classrooms, but also to our residence halls and to our organizations and to our clubs. So I would say that a school supplement can be very reflective, not only of a school's personality, but the qualities that they're looking for in students. So at Princeton, we are asking additional questions about how you have had difficult conversations with someone else, and how did you react to that? Because we know that your time here on campus, you're going to be challenged with your viewpoint. You're going to have uncomfortable conversations inside and outside the classroom, but we're looking for students who are able to do that in a respectful and thoughtful way. And so our questions hopefully pull out those characteristics that we think are important as we build a class every year. Civic engagement is an important part of the Princeton experience. And so we ask for you to reflect on, or for applicants to reflect on, how they've engaged in service work and what it means to them and what they might do in the future around that topic. So I think as you are going through the application process, taking a hard look at a school supplement, the questions that they're asking. And we're not just asking you this because we want you to write more essays. We're asking you because we hope and we think that they'll pull out the characteristics that should be important in this process for us.
Mm-hmm. I want to highlight something that I think you both have referred to, which is just that kind of intellectual engagement on the part of students. So it's and that doesn't necessarily mean perfect grades, although obviously grades are one element of one measure of that. But so it's not just academic success, it's intellectual engagement. It's actual like joy and pleasure in learning that'll make you engage with the community. The students who can demonstrate that in the application are certainly going to be read favorably, even if they're not ultimately admitted just because of numbers. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. I think that's a very fair characterization.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I actually think that could be a point of distinction for a student, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I'm not saying it's easy to get good grades, but there are a lot of applicants who have very strong academic records. And so when there's also kind of something else happening, you know, up here, right? And I just want to reiterate that you can show kind of intellectual curiosity through all sorts of different topics, right? You know, like I've read essays about students kind of musing on the different genres of music that they like to listen to and why, and how that's led them down random paths. I mean, you know, video game and gaming world and all of that, and how that connects to kind of how societies or groups are formed and interpersonal dynamics. I mean, literally someone could talk about their leadership in an online Smash Brothers community. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. You might be interested in anthropology or sociology. Like, so don't feel like it has to be confined to the classes that you're taking. You really can show that life of the mind in a lot of different ways, in terms of how you're engaging with the world around you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was going to echo, I mean, you alluded to this, Isabel, but I think there is this idea that you have to have tangible experiences, say like in a lab, if you are interested in the sciences. And we understand that that is not an opportunity available to every student across the United States and across the world. And it's how you're talking about things, like Isabel said, not just what you've done. We ask for your list of extracurricular activities, but we are not basing our decisions on what you've done, but how are you reflecting on those experiences and how that might impact what you do once you get to our campus.
Yeah, and I want to ask you too a few simplistic questions, just because these are such persistent myths. First off, are internships required?
As
of
applicants,
course not.
No. No.
I'm like, internships are very hard to get for high school students.
Yes.
Internships are not magic. You could do amazing things just through something that's called volunteering, you know, like.
I mean, you can label anything an internship.
Right, exactly.
I don't really, what it's labeled or called. I'm more interested in like the what, and then the why, or the so what, like what was the impact, or what did it make you think or feel, or all of that.
Yeah, of course. So again, like this is like I'm taking advantage of you two being here to bust some myths, but this one comes up a lot that they've got to find an internship and they're almost impossible to find. And sometimes parents of ninth graders are looking for internships. And I'm like, you are definitely not going to find one because that's just not going to happen. So the other thing is that undergraduate research is required. Or I mean, sorry, I shouldn't say undergraduate research as a high school student. Yeah.
No,
And
definitely not.
Yeah, and it's really important because I think there's some folks who are really interested in doing academic research or knowledge creation, but are nervous because they feel like they haven't had that experience in high school and they're not going to be poised to enter that at the collegiate level. And that's just simply and totally not true. And also many faculty members may have a distinct approach to their research, right? And so it will depend on if you're entering into someone else's research, if you're doing your own research that is funded by the institution. So there's so many different entry points, and it's not just freshman year either. I mean, you can literally decide, wake up senior year and you want to do research period or try something in a different field. Lots of access for that.
Yeah, and I know I talked about research at Princeton. That is a requirement once you're here. It is certainly not a requirement for admission, you know, and I think it's worth just at least mentioning that every student's extracurricular list is going to look very different. And I do think, Sally, as you were saying, that there's this idea that certain activities carry more weight than others, and that schools, highly selective schools like Princeton and Dartmouth, are looking for those specific things for us to admit them, and that is certainly not the case. We know that there are students who might have to have a job because they need to help support the family, or they have to go home after school to help take care of a sibling, and there is merit in both of those things. And so we're not putting weight on one over another. They are different, and how students are talking about that, or how they connect it with what they want to do, or as Isabel said, the why is what's most important in our process.
Yeah, and let's highlight that, like how they are able to, like I'm always trying and talk to student about, you know, you have very limited real estate to communicate to the colleges who you are. So sort of being able to express what matters to you, not just through your essay, but through your extracurriculars, and even to a more limited degree, because in high school, a lot of your courses are dictated, like the choices that you've made. So would you say that that's accurate? Like that's forming a narrative? Because I know that when I was an admission officer at University of Chicago, I kind of would think like, this is the student who loves philosophy. You know, like you would sort of like look for that consistent narrative. Not that, as you said, Isabel, there couldn't be changes partway through, but you wanted to kind of understand sometimes if there was a major switch, why that happened, if it wasn't obvious. But feel free to disagree. I'm very interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think some kids can be described in that way, but others are not as straightforward, right? And that's okay. So I want to actually go back to, you mentioned something about kind of how you tell your story, and there's so much focus on the essay and so much pressure on the essay, but there are so many other elements to the application that a student doesn't directly impact, but can. And so I think, for example, of the letters of recommendation, whether it's a counselor letter or a teacher letter, and let's just be really clear, we are fully aware that there are nowhere near enough counselors for students in high schools, particularly in public high schools. So there are some places where they simply just won't write a letter. And that is really, you know, I don't know, I have personal feelings about just kind of the investment in, you know, college going. But I also tell students, if for some reason you can't, or your counselor isn't going to write one for you, feel free to send in another one from some other adult, school, or community member who kind of sees you in that more macro way. But you know, when you think about your teachers and who you're asking, you know, why are you asking them to write that letter of recommendation? You know, maybe don't just have the brag sheet or the resume that you're sharing with them, but what is it about their class or your relationship with that person that makes you think that they will be able to kind of share important contextual information about who you are, right? Did that person inspire you to kind of read a different book, to try a different activity, to continue on with math, even though it wasn't your favorite subject, but now you're going to take that harder course? So, you know, really trying to still prepare the others who are speaking on your behalf and be thoughtful and intentional, and then share that with them as well to best prepare them to write those letters of recommendation.
Yeah. And Sally, just go back to your other question. I will say, just briefly that I think context is so important in throughout this entire process, but especially around this topic where, colleges ask your academic interest, what you might pursue. Some colleges you're applying to a specific major, and we look for proof of that or some indication that you are able to articulate that interest throughout your application. And, if you're talking about philosophy, there are some high schools where they offer philosophy as electives, or you can take Latin or Greek, and the classics are a big part of the curriculum. And so, you're making those choices because you have the opportunity to do that. But, my public high school in Connecticut, we certainly didn't have any of those classes. And so we're reading applications from those high schools and those communities. We don't expect that to be on a student's transcript. So there are choices that students can make, but we also know that there are limits as to what's available to them. And we never hold it against a student if they don't have that opportunity to take a specific class because it's not offered at their high school. There are certainly other ways that they can show us that interest or articulate why they might pursue that on our campus.
Yeah, actually, the student I was thinking about never took philosophy in high school, but came across a kind of philosophical text in an English class, and then started reading on his own and wrote like his essay about it and how that had led him to look at different world religions. And it was this sort of amazing story. So, yeah, so that kind of, and part of the reason I brought up philosophy too, just so you know, is because there's so much focus on math and science. And I always want to make sure people know that, like, you don't have to be a scientist or a mathematician. In fact, you can be totally undecided and get into your institutions. I
would argue that if you're really embracing the kind of ethos and rationale behind the liberal arts, that you actually should be more open-minded, right? We have lots and lots of students who indicate a major, some because they know that that's really what they're passionate about, others because they feel like they should choose something and they're worried about being undecided. But this idea of the liberal arts of having kind of, one area of focus, but really broad exposure to a wide variety of ways about thinking about data and information and processing that in different, structures and frameworks. That's how you get the most out of the education at our institutions, that open-mindedness, and still having a future goal in mind, but being willing and open to change your mind, to realize that is not failure if you don't do the thing that you thought you were going to be when someone asked you, what are you going to be when you grow up? But to have that kind of confidence to try different things and to be open, that is how I think you really can make the most out of some of these amazing undergraduate experiences.
Completely agree. All right, unfortunately, we have to end now because time is up. But thank you both so much. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
All right. And so I want to recommend next week's show to our audience. If you are a student with ADHD, or maybe you're the parent of one, we'll be interviewing Hannah Choi of Beyond Booksmart's podcast, Focus Forward. So check us out for that. And as always, we're here every week, 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific on Thursdays.